Welcome to episode number 158 of the Marine Layer podcast. We welcome on recurring guest, Seattle Times Mariners beat writer Ryan Divish, to chat about Scott Servais getting fired, Dan Wilson being the new permanent Mariners manager, and then some interesting things he brought up about the offseason and what could be. So we'll dive into that a little bit in the interview, and then we'll react to it after the interview as well.
Here's your guys' reminder. Stay on top of all of our stuff. If you want to do that, download these podcast episodes if you're listening. If you're downloading, make sure to leave a 5-star review, leave a written review. If you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and then follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod.
Let's get it rolling.
The pitch from Acevedo. A drive deep to right field. Down the line. The Mariners win this game 2-1. The dream lives. They're going to the playoffs. 1-1 from Jansen. There you go. Left field. We got a tie ball game. Julio. Oh, baby, what a moment. Tie ball game at 7-7.
And we welcome you to this episode of the Marine Layer podcast, part of the Just Baseball Podcast Network. Recording here on Monday evening, August 26th. The Mariners are 3-1 in the Dan Wilson era. And it was good to have Ryan Divish come on this podcast today and talk a little bit about Dan getting hired, some of the fallout from last week. We had our reactions to it, but it's always good to get some perspective from the man who knows it all. Ryan Divish himself really paints quite a picture of how the Mariners organization, some of the players, how they operated through last week, and how they're going to look at Dan Wilson here and some of the more of the things into the future. That was really interesting. There's a reason Ryan's the best at what he does. And we're like, I know he's eventually going to stop writing. He's said it. He's very public about it. We talk about it in the interview again, but we're really going to miss him because he's awesome.
He's the best. There is a reason he is very popular among Seattle media as a podcast guest, as a radio guest, etc., because he gives so much information, more than most people will give, and he's not afraid to talk about it either, which is why he's such an awesome guest. So, yeah, this episode's going to be a little bit backwards, where normally you'll hear us talk for the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour of the show. We'll do an interview, and then we'll kind of wrap things up. There's so much to react to and take away from this interview, because it is a lot, that we wanted to have the interview played, let you guys all listen to it first, and then the two of us will react to it afterward. Because again, that's the bulk of this show. There's a lot to take away. Yes, the Mariners are 3-1 under Dan Wilson. That's great. I still don't think the offense looks all that inspiring. We're going to need to see a much larger sample size before we make any real conclusions about that. I think that's basically the summary.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah. Before that, let's talk to you guys very quickly about our friends over at Pagach's Pub 85. That's over in Kirkland. You want a spot to go watch the games. Mariners are starting to heat up a little bit. Maybe you're inspired and excited about the Dan Wilson era, so you want to plan a night out with your friends. Go watch the Mariners. Go watch any sporting events for that matter. College football about to start again, or it has started. NFL about to start again. Head over there. There's more than 20 TVs in that place with some great food, games to play, and awesome happy hour specials. If you go during happy hour, drinks are $3 and $4. It's Monday through Friday, 2 to 6 p.m. happy hour. All of that is over at Pagach's Pub 85 in Kirkland.
Don't want to keep you guys any longer. Let's get you to that interview with Ryan Divish, and we'll talk to you after. All right, we welcome on Seattle Times Mariners beat writer Ryan Divish. Ryan, thanks so much for taking some time to join us. Let's just jump right into it. We're recording here on Sunday. I want to go back a week ago while Scott Servais is still the manager of the Seattle Mariners. And once you start, I guess, hearing a little bit more and anticipating a little bit more, I'm curious how you have having covered Scott for so long, like how you observed the situation and what you thought of it as it was going along before the decision was ultimately made on Thursday.
Yeah, it's weird. Like I've covered the Mariners since 2006 in some capacity. So I covered Mike Hargrove quitting in the middle of a season, mostly over, I think, a contract dispute. I covered John McLaren, his replacement getting fired a year and a half later. I covered Don Wakamatsu getting fired. And I covered Eric Wedge getting mad because he didn't get the contract extension he wanted and leaving the organization. I covered Floyd McClendon not getting re-upped by Jerry Dipoto. So this was not something new for me, but this is different. I mean, it'd been 9 years, so I've covered Scott a long time, and I don't know, like I didn't even when I pre-wrote. I'm sure I've said this before on other stuff, but I pre-wrote my story that Scott was getting fired. I wrote a headline or like a lead for my story on the Saturday of the Pirate series, and I wasn't even covering the Pirate series. Adam Jude was covering the Pirate series. I was in Montana. I was texting with Adam. I was like, I'm gonna start writing that they're gonna fire Scott, just because like there's so much acrimony around the organization, around him, and like I don't use the vocal minority that is Twitter, Mariners Twitter, as my gauge, because that's just, I mean, it's a small group of very intense people kind of shouting a lot. But like I was starting to get a lot of emails, and then I was hearing from, former Mariners employees and stuff like that, like, oh, this is going to happen, Jerry's going to do this, Jerry's going to do this. So I started writing it on that Sunday, and then, they won on Sunday, and I flew into LA, and after the first game in LA, I wrote the rest of it on that Tuesday at the hotel. I was sitting by the pool at the Pasadena Westin, and I wrote probably 9 paragraphs about Scott being fired, just looking back at everything. Had little like open spaces where I would add his record and everything else. And then Wednesday night after they were swept, I stayed at Dodger Stadium, updated that story, and then even switched my flight to back to Seattle. I was flying out at 10. It was the line at 1, I think, or around there. And I took a 7 a.m. flight out of Burbank instead, just to make sure that I was back in case something happened. So, and even then, like, through all of that, I didn't think, just because these guys, this isn't what they do. I mean, they don't fire guys mid-season. At least this regime, Jerry hadn't. So in the back of my mind, I was like, I did all this work, and I got up and got 1.5 hours of sleep or whatever and crushed myself, thinking they weren't going to do it. But at the same time, like, every part of me thought, well, if they don't do it now, either they're going to ride it out till the end, and then they'll just fire him after the season's over with when they don't make the postseason. And so I guess, like, that's my thinking, was just trying to figure out where Jerry fit into it, where ownership fit into it. Would Jerry do that in hopes of like a Hail Mary at the very end to try and pull out a miracle playoff appearance? I don't know. But then, yeah. So then, like, I woke up that day thinking, yeah, it's probably going to happen. I got a couple texts from some people, and they thought, yeah, this will probably be the day. And I don't know that they were like hard and fast on it, but they thought that they kind of hinted there have been discussions. So once I know that they're discussing the idea of firing him, then, the record, the struggles for the 2 months and everything else, that just kind of pointed me to what's going to happen. And yet I didn't break it, and I had to sit on it for quite a while, too.
Yeah, where does, really quick before we start to dive into more of this stuff, where does this whole situation rank for you in terms of what you've covered in your career, being a Mariners beat reporter, like the chaos of it? Where does it rank?
It's familiar territory. Just had been unfamiliar for a while, but like, and it's not the PR people's fault. Like the baseball folks, like Tim Havley and Alex Mayer, Adam Gresh, Freddie Llanos, Jordan Stone, they're all pros. It's the people above them that don't listen to the people that they hired to do the job. It's truly amazing to me, and how bad they can screw this stuff up. But part of it, the problem is like there's too many folks involved in the decision process a lot of these times, and that's how it gets messed up. That's how it gets leaked. All this stuff kind of happens because I think, there's not one owner making a decision. There's a group of owners. There's not, obviously Jerry is the president of baseball operations, but like he got Stanton is his boss. And so like all this stuff, and then just like that group of people sometimes not listening to what the PR folks say, or like just not having a lot of common sense about the world around them, because like they don't live in the same, if you're rich enough to own a baseball team, you don't live in the same world we do. They might see this stuff on Twitter, but like it's just not. So it's like I always just joke that they need a vice president of common sense, and like, hey, hey, let me tell you how this is going to look. A vice president of perception, because they're clearly not listening to their PR folks whose job it is to tell them, hey, this is how it's going to look in the media or on social media, and then they do it, and then they look at those people and say, well, I can't believe this happened. And the PR people are like, no, we told you this was going to happen. You did it anyways. This is an organization. When they fired Don Wakamatsu, the first Japanese-American manager, they fired him on Asian American Appreciation Night. That day, they fired him. When the day that they made the Kendall Graveman trade and all hell broke loose, that was the day they were introducing Katie Griggs as the first female president of business operations in Major League Baseball. And Harry Ford was at the field that day as well, doing his introduction to the media as a first-round pick. Do you think we got to write any of those stories? I didn't even interview Harry that day. I was busy talking to angry players, though I was told that Harry actually saw Tom Murphy freak out about the trade and scared the crap out of him, but I don't know if that's true or not. Could you, because apparently when Murph found out about the trade, he went, ape and just started ripping things and throwing things and breaking things. So, yeah, and supposedly Harry saw a little bit of that, but who knows? So, I don't know if it ranks. I just, this organization from the on high folks, they have a way of doing things that just ass backwards at times, or just what the hell were you doing? And like I said, it's the people that we work with or we are around, they're pros and they know what's going on, and it just seems like they often don't listen to what they say, which is a shame, because, they actually know what they're doing. You're not paying them very well, but they know what they're doing. You should probably listen to them more.
Ryan, I want to nominate you for the vice president of common sense. I feel like once you're done writing, let me just kind of flesh this out a little bit. It's like once you're done writing, I know you're going back to Montana. That's what you've made pretty clear. But this is something you can do remotely, first of all, and secondly, it doesn't even need to be a full-time commitment. You can essentially just consult on this. So anytime there's a question, they hit you up, you send them a text in response, and it's solved, and there's your work.
Yeah,
that's supplements.
I would seriously do that kind of consulting work, and there is no bigger way to steal money than being a consultant in all this stuff. That movie House of Lies, or that TV show House of Lies on Showtime, great show. It's all about being a consultant and not really doing anything, but getting paid for it. Think about how many, what's a bigger robbery is these hiring firms, these companies that do hiring searches. Oh my God. How many times have they messed that up? So yeah, no, I would love to be the vice president of common sense and just hey, we're going to do this. Okay, but here's what's really going to happen. We think this promotion is really good. Okay, but have you thought about what could happen here? Because I think sometimes smart people get caught up in one track and they're so focused on that, and that's what makes them smart, is they can laser focus on that, that they don't find the whole, 50,000 foot view or the 10,000 foot view that Jerry likes to say. The day that Jerry said the 54% comment, you had to go into a mode there. I don't even know if you could walk it back. But that was just a catastrophe from day one. And they have made a smarter move not putting Jerry out there as much. But then again, Jerry doing that interview with Ken Rosenthal, nothing good comes, that's as a competitor, nothing good comes from that, honestly. In that situation where you're at as a team, and knowing just kind of, and it's odd because I don't think Jerry and Ken were on the best of terms from their days, when he was in the Angels and they had to deal with Socha, stuff like that, and some other stuff he's written. Rosenthal cut him up pretty good when they hired Scott Servais, and then over the Lorena Martin stuff too. So it's you go and you do this interview with this writer that you don't really like, and then you do it a day or two before, as you're probably going to fire Scott, and that's what's coming. Unless they did it on purpose to kind of float it out there that this may be coming. But once Jerry said those comments, like, you know, you kind of knew it was dead man walking. So this whole thing was just, if they're writing a handbook on how to do this and how to fire a manager and everything else, probably not the best way to do it.
Was there a tipping point, like a singular one?
For them to fire Scott?
Yeah.
No, I think it's a build. I mean, I think it's been building for a while. But probably the Detroit series, if you're looking for one, just getting your ass handed to you in Detroit like that and looking bad doing it and losing 2 out of 3 here doing it too. And that's not a good team. And, you know, I don't question that the Mariners play hard, but the optics of it made it look like the Tigers were playing harder than them. I don't think they necessarily were. The Tigers were just more aggressive, more energetic, more, you know, they just brought a different level, and the Mariners looked slow and lethargic and like they didn't care. And I know they did care because I talked to several players after those losses and they were pissed. But, like, you know, just the optics of that looked pretty bad. So I think if that may be what really kind of pushed Jerry to that point. But I think it's more also just the acrimony over Scott on social media, on all networks, really everything. Like, there was a lot of blowback. And I'm sure, like, the Mariners, you know, their season ticket holders and stuff like that, they were hearing it from there as well. And, you know, the one thing is like, if you're making your decisions based on fan reaction, that's a bad road to get down to. And I'm not saying all fans are stupid, contrary to popular belief or contrary to what I may say in my fits of rage, but, like, you know, what you're trying to do with a manager and what the role of a manager is, I mean, you should have a better understanding of what's important versus what fans were really upset about, which is not bunting enough, reliever usage, you know, that kind of stuff, which is all just in the moment with a minimal amount of information provided in those decisions for people to understand.
Yeah, so on that note, there are a couple quotes I wanted to ask you about to at least get your take on them, about what you make of them. One of them is what Jeff Passan said on Brock and Salk on Friday. The exact quote, at least what Jeff said, was, inside of that clubhouse, and he said this dates back years, there were issues that just never got resolved, and there were players who were never on board with them. Like, I guess I was always under the impression that he was pretty well received Servais in that clubhouse, but at least from what Jeff makes it sound like, maybe that wasn't always the case. Like, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, the thing is, though, how many people are around from a few years ago, honestly?
Right.
I mean, like,
right.
they cycle out so many players off and on, so it's like, you know, J.P. Crawford likes Scott. I mean, him and Scott were guys. He's been around the longest. Then you have Dylan Moore and Mitch Haniger, the next longest, and they were there for some of the earlier issues with Scott. Like, this is the problem with, and it's more of a narrative, and maybe, you know, but we couldn't really write it the way to debunk it a little bit, but in a lot of the players' minds, and it goes back to the Mather situation and all that, when the Mather stuff comes out and everything else and all this other stuff is going on, it's Jerry represented that faction, you know, the front office. So players don't, you know, and they didn't trust him, but, you know, because of the narrative that Scott does anything and everything that Jerry says, then they don't trust Scott because they just think he's an extension of Jerry. You know what I mean? Like, they thought, oh yeah, Scott's just Jerry's puppet. Well, I think as over the years have gone on, that's not necessarily the case, in the sense that, like, Scott and Jerry aren't the best of friends anymore. Well, they're definitely not now, probably, but you know, that relationship was distanced a little bit. I mean, if your best friend, okay, look at you two. If one of you becomes the other person's boss for 9 years, and then, like, tells you what to do, makes you wear all your, you know, the boss makes the mistake, but the other guy has to go out and wear it every day, and you don't get to you don't get to make a lot of decisions, and, like, you know, he controls how much money you make and all that other stuff. Yeah, there's going to be a split, a fracture, and it's going to distance himself. I mean, I've heard Scott and Jerry yelling at each other, you know, post game. You know, Scott's mad because of the players that Jerry's, you know, because Scott doesn't have any, like, no manager has influence on the roster anymore. They can have influence, but they don't get a say. You know, GMs now and presidents hold the ultimate power. It's not said it before, but, like, they're not. This isn't like Moneyball where you got to go trade a player so the manager doesn't play him. they all run it. So it's like, I just think it's a difference, and I think the players don't necessarily understand that either. There's a distrust of the front office for all that went down earlier, and other stuff, and they look at Jerry as the representative of the front office and the decision making on, players you acquire, players you don't, or whatever. And then by extension, because Scott is still so affiliated with Jerry, that they don't, there's a distrust. They don't have that maybe separation where it's the manager and the guys in the clubhouse versus the front office. No, they viewed Scott more as a guy that was so close to the front office, which I don't necessarily know that's true, but it's also because like how they play and how the decision making is made, in terms of having the analysts, having, the input from Jerry and Justin, and having, how the style of baseball, whether it's the platooning, the kind of the building out their boards and their red, green, yellow for relievers on who you want to go with, the pockets and all that stuff, which, this is common with almost every team now. They do this all. I mean, like, everybody collaborates together to make the decision process. It's not just one guy out there, well, you know what, my gut feels like he can, It's like, it's not Lou Brown in Major League. Oh, I know Vaughn's struggled with this guy, but I got a feeling he's due. We don't see that. And then like the gaffes, the Robbie Ray in the postseason and stuff like that. There's stuff like that, but even like with Haniger, he was one of those guys that I think came around a little more on Scott from being where he was, and then Scott came in and everything, because I think Scott tried really hard to impose his will early on, and I think he realized that doesn't work, and I think and I kind of wrote this, through the faults of his own, through the failures of his own playing career and everything else, he realized that you got to let people be who they are and then try and work within the framework of that. And I think that was important, and it got better. But some of the people that were still there and the remnants of friends were gone and everything else, it's like, that's another thing. It's like, you get rid of my friend on the team, you get rid of this guy that I work with, this trainer, this coach, this whatever staffer, you get rid of him. Well, I don't like you because you hurt my friend. I mean, like, I even told Scott that one time. I said, there are a lot of people that want to see you fail because how, Jerry and others, Jerry specifically, how he treated. Like, they fired a bunch of the scouting staff, fired coaches and stuff like that. So it was like, I think that was the reason why there is that kind of distrust, because there's still a segment of players based on narrative and based on how they do things that always felt that, like, Scott and Jerry were so tight instead of Scott being on his own island.
I think the other thing I was curious to ask you about too, like before we get to some more of the Dan Wilson stuff, is just to start to wrap up on Scott here a little bit, is maybe we read too much into this, but I guess the quote Julio gave you guys the other day, and specifically the difference between him and JP's, because when JP was asked about Servais, and you just mentioned it, like, he really likes Scott, and he said, "You taught me how to be myself on the field. I think that's really changed my career." And then Julio's quote, I mean, he gave this to Daniel Kramer. He said, "I'm just kind of focused on playing baseball. That's a higher up decision. We're employees, so I just have to go out and play every day." Now, are we reading too much into that quote, or was it a little, like, wishy-washy?
Maybe. I mean, I'm not going to say you're wearing a tinfoil hat and looking for conspiracy theories, but, I mean, I think players just move forward, I think they just move forward. Like, if somebody gets fired, it's like, okay, yeah, this sucks. Gotta go. It's, really, Julio's dealing with enough stuff on his own right now to kind of, like, focus on it. So I don't know that, like, in that, like, the context of it all, like, I was kind of there for some of the comments. It was more, Julio was just trying to get ready to go, and it was clear, like, a lot of guys just didn't want to talk about it. I mean, like, in their minds too, like, they know in the back, we sucked, so he got fired. It's the second guy that lost their job because we can't hit, and he's at the forefront of the players that are supposed to hit that isn't hitting. So they weren't, Haniger didn't want to really dwell on it. He'd say some things, and then, JP and Scott had a different relationship than a lot of the other players. But, like somebody like Victor Robles, who in 2 months really loved Scott for allowing him to be who he was, whereas like a DC, not so much. So, I don't know. I mean, like, do you ever really truly love your boss? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I don't think that there was like this dislike for Julio for Scott, but I know Scott is hard on Julio. He, people may not think it, and like because he doesn't blow people up on the field or in the media, but I know I've heard and I saw more than a couple of times where Scott's brought Julio into his office because he was unhappy with something that was going on the field or his approach. I mean, he has been as critical of Julio as probably any player about his approach, stuff he talked about not being ready to hit, all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, I'm sure Julio doesn't like that, but I also don't think he reads it either. So, I don't. I think they just all moved on. I mean, like, even as upset as they were about Kendall Graveman being traded that day or Paul Sewell being traded, like 2 days later they moved on because that's what they do. They learn to forget real quick.
Now to Dan Wilson, who got hired on Thursday, and instead of making him an interim manager, they made him a full-time manager. Why did they not put the interim tag on him, and why did they name him the full-time manager instead of just waiting to the offseason to see a full process?
I have no idea. I mean, that was the first question I asked on Jerry's thing. I'm on there first. I just said, hey, is he full-time or is he an interim or what's the deal here? Because I looked on there and I didn't see an interim. It's funny, I look on the release and I don't see interim, and then Ben Ranieri texts me and goes, is he the full-time? They don't say interim on the thing. I was like, I was just thinking that myself. I'll ask. And then Jerry says it's because, like, when you're the interim, I guess you're like the substitute teacher, thing. It's like you don't really wield any power. But at the same time, Dan Wilson is so respected that, I think the players are going to listen to him just because. And he's such a good dude, I don't know. I mean, everything I've heard is that Dan is the manager moving forward. Now, maybe 25 or 30 days from now, Dan says, I don't want to do this anymore. This is crazy. This is way too much work. This isn't for me. And I'll go open up the search. But, I mean, from what I've been told, that's what he's going to do. He's going to run it forward. And then, I don't know what's up with the rest of the coaching staff, like who's going to be back, who isn't. We were just discussing that. Obviously, I think you want to keep Pete Woodworth and Trent Blank, the pitching guys, and, Perry Hill. I mean, if people don't realize, I know Josh Rojas made an error today, but, like, I watched Josh Rojas at third base this spring. Perry Hill's a miracle worker. I watched Tyler Locklear play quite a bit last year, too, and this year, Perry Hill's a miracle worker. So, I think you want to kind of keep him around as well, but I don't really know. It's really odd, and it goes back to kind of like how they handled this and everything else. Like, wait, you're not going to do a search? You're not going to you're just going to do this? I'd heard that Dan liked managing in the 6 games he did with Tacoma a couple years ago, but like nobody really thought that like he was ultra serious about it, So who knows? I just that was like. Okay, well, we're going to do it this way. Like their process, this is an organization that's really driven by process, at least on the baseball side of it, the performance side. But, man, I don't know about this one. I mean, like, that's not an indictment against Dan by any means. It's just like, it's just curious how they handled it because, like, you've limited yourself to no other options. And do you really want to do something crappy to Dan Wilson? Do you really want to embarrass him or, like, say they fire Jerry or whatever? I mean, and they bring in another guy and he wants somebody new? I mean, I just, most managers' jobs end badly anyways. And that I just don't get this one. So, I mean, hopefully maybe they untap something and Dan will be here forever. I don't know.
Let me put a pin in that Jerry thing. I think I'll want to circle back to that in a couple minutes. But on this same note about, why they didn't do the external search, I think we assumed, and I think a lot of people assumed, Dan could be the interim manager the rest of the year, and maybe long-term that's who they really love, right? If they did a full search this offseason, look at people outside the org, whoever, bring them in, talk to them, have conversations, and then ultimately decide, okay, we like Dan Wilson the best, then I think that's fine. I guess we were just all a little shocked, and the two of us for sure, that they just snap of the fingers, this is the manager, rather than at least allowing themselves to have other people at least present their case to do it.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, you look at this organization, in that reputation aspect of it all, it's like, oh yeah, I don't know if I really want to work for these guys. But at the same time, there's only 30 jobs, and you look at the baseline level of talent that the organization has right now. Yeah, I mean, you're a manager, you look pretty smart when you roll out those 5 starters, you know, and you got Munoz, you still have Julio, you have a good core, you have a catcher that's like locked in, is foundational level. Like you still have a good core of players. Now, like the overall roster itself, I think is lacking in a lot of talent, in everyday talent. Like you can only have so many platoons where it just becomes redundant. It just becomes a bunch of guys just shifting in and out that aren't very good either way. But yeah, I mean, it would be attractive if they were hiring a GM. It would be attractive if you're a manager. I mean, I could think of a lot of good managers out there. You know, hell, Stephen Vogt might want to just be able to come back and live here full time. Who knows? But I think it was really odd how they did it. But maybe they believe in Dan the man. I mean, you know, I can't say a bad word about him. He's the nicest human being I've met. He's like the opposite of me in every way. He's always in a good mood. He's always friendly. He's very upbeat and outgoing. And even, like, I feel better about myself being around Dan Wilson. You know, it's like, you know, it's really nice. He's like the friendly neighborhood fireman that comes along and rescues kittens out of the trees and stuff like that.
Does he give you crap about your shorts?
No, he does not. Because my shorts fit me normally.
If I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat, Ryan, could this be more, like, thinking of how this process went down, could this be the Mariners worrying that they could not get enough serious candidates in here, with the candidates not knowing the strength of the job security of the guy who would be hiring them in the first place, and Jerry, and knowing that Jerry has a bad 2025, I'm out of a job again?
No, because I think players that are going to be managers or managerial candidates, people who are managerial candidates, have such a belief in their ability to find success that they wouldn't think otherwise, you know? I mean, and yeah, reputation or whatever, they all believe, well, look, you know, if you're a managerial candidate, you look at it and like, oh, all I got to do is, you know, I got that pitching staff, just finally find a way to get this offense to score 4 runs. You know, I'm money. You know, that's the thing. It's like, find a way to score 4 runs, you're gonna win 70% of the time. That's what you think. And I mean, the organization, if you're gonna sign here, you're gonna sign a multi-year deal. You're gonna sign a 1-year deal, so you're getting paid either way. So it's like, yeah, okay, I'll come in, I'll sign a 3-year deal or a 2-year deal with an option. So I'll get 3 years of pay, and one way or the other. And if I get fired because the GM gets fired, then I'll leave. But most people believe that. I mean, like, you know, you're telling me if the one thing is the kicker is how much do they pay? But Scott still was in the bottom third of managerial salaries, even after 9 years. But like, yeah, I mean, like, if you're AJ Hinch and you look at your situation in Detroit versus your situation in Seattle, maybe you want that. You know, West Coast guy, maybe you want that. I don't know. I think they'd be fine with, they'd have a lot of candidates, you know, and it's, you know, it's not like being a producer for 710. I mean, there's a couple candidates, you two probably duking it out for the job, you know, or somebody trying to take my job. I mean, when I quit here, you know, like, who knows?
Yeah, so where does that leave Jerry in all this? I guess, like, TJ alluded to it a minute ago, but you mentioned on 710, I think a couple days ago, that he's got that option in his contract next year. Like, does his job feel safe after all this? That's how it seemed from afar when these moves were made, but what do you think, at least for next year?
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people, and that's like the biggest thing on social media is to parse. Whenever Jerry Dipoto speaks, is to parse and look for meaning, you know, in all of it. And like, well, he said this, so this means this. I mean, honestly, Jerry Dipoto has never thought he was going to be fired a day in his life, I'm sure, since he's taken this job. Like, he just has that belief in what he's doing, and he doesn't take the time to worry about that kind of stuff, you know? Even, like, you know, he'll take culpability in all of it, but it's just like, oh, yeah, but... Because it's like, you know, the way he talks is like he's going to be back next year. I don't know that there's a guarantee on that. if there is, they haven't announced any contract extension or anything like that. But I think, again, it goes back to that mindset too. Like, Jerry believes in his process and like how they do stuff, and so I think he believes like, yeah, you know what, like, so like let's say they say, well, maybe he's a lame duck next year or even like this year. You know what, our process is going to work. We'll find a way to make it work, and then I'll get my extension. I'll just keep going. It's like he believes in all the things he does, obviously more so than perhaps me and you or some fans or anything else, but he believes in it. I mean, like, other than not being on a radio show every week, I mean, like, it's not like he's any different after the 54% stuff. He's not around as much, but he's kind of like, he's been like that a little bit in contract years too as well. So I don't know. I mean, like, I don't think he's ever really thought, oh yeah, I'm worried about, I'm going to get fired. In his mind, if you worry about stuff like that, it takes away from your other goal, which is like trying to win. So I don't know. It just doesn't seem like that's something he, I wouldn't say comprehends, but just analyzes, because like he's a move forward type of person.
What do you feel like are the difference in traits between Scott Servais and Dan Wilson, whether it be managerial, personality-wise, or whatever you think is relevant?
I mean, it's a couple white catchers. Like, I don't, I mean, like, the one thing is this, like, Dan has the cachet of playing here, of being beloved, of being Dan the man, and like his reputation with the fan base has already been built up. So it's not like, it's a little more, he has more rope, I think, than Servais. Because like, honestly, like, you guys are around this, you've seen up close how they do things. Do you think anything, or many things, or even anything is going to drastically change with Dan here? I mean, how they do stuff, like the early work, the meetings, the even like how they do lineups. I mean, the lineup that they put out the first day Dan managed was the same as the one that was the day before. You can only stack the pancakes in so many ways and put the butter on top one way. Like, it's like this is who they are. So I don't know, like, because it's not like you like. I was watching Dan in that first game, and I even wrote about it. It's kind of had the same kind of like I wouldn't say confused, but just like this same stoic look of, oh my God, are we ever going to get a hit in that first game? And then they got 6 in a row because that Rogers guy sucks. But like, yeah, I don't sit there and think, that they're, because it's not like he's going to be the fiery guy or anything like that either. Mm-hmm. The one thing is if Scott's been there a long time and stuff like that, and so sometimes like it falls on deaf ears a little bit because you hear the same things over and over again. So it's just like, okay, yeah, he's going to say that. They know what he's going to say more often or not. They know how he's going to react. So it doesn't, it's not different. It's always going to be the same. So, because Scott is a consistent person, and that was one of the things, is he always wanted to be consistent with how he handles stuff, because he didn't want to surprise players, because players didn't like that. And he isn't wrong in that thinking, but at the same time, sometimes you need to surprise them, or like scare the crap out of them, or whatever, or do something to get them going, because it's like they're going to do what, they're going to operate the same sometimes if you don't do something to change it up drastically. And I think Scott's probably biggest fault was that he trusted his players so much to perform, because they work hard, they work. That's not a problem. We watch them. You guys are there. You see how much time they put in. They put more time in the hitting and the extra work and everything else than any team I've covered. It hasn't translated over in the field. He's always believed that if you do the work and you put all the preparation in, that eventually it would happen, and so are these players. But that's not happening. So instead of trusting him to do that, maybe you got to go shake it up a little bit more. And it's not like you can yell at him or anything like that. They've had multiple team meetings and stuff. It's just they kind of just aren't performing. I mean, like, even with Dan, and they won the series against the Giants, but I mean, like, I don't even know how they won. Honestly, the one game they got 6 hits in a row, and Yesterday they lost and they took 9 walks and they lost the game. It's not like they hit, even today they scored a run on a double play and error, and it's never going to be pretty. So I don't know. Maybe it's just like the different presence. I do think Scott was a little. You could feel the anxiety a little bit with Scott as it was slipping away, and just kind of like, I can't get this to stop. No matter what I try and do, I can't get this to stop. I can't get these guys to hit. And we saw it the one time where he kind of had the emotional break where he teared up, just I protect these guys up here and I don't rip them, and everybody has a breaking point, but it just wasn't working, so I think that's why.
On that note, the last one I've got for you, Ryan, is clearly this winter the Mariners are going to have a long look in the mirror about how they're going to improve this hitting philosophy organizationally. Where in the world do they start if you were to take your best guess?
Animal sacrifice. Just live chickens, goats.
That's a Bull Durham. That's a good Bull Durham poll.
Yeah, I don't. You can't. If the reputation of this organization is it's a bad place to hit, has that changed? It's made it worse. Yeah. Maybe they. I was half joking, but I think we'll see the batter's eye straightened out next year with a different kind of paint color on it than, that they've talked about. But
seriously,
I do think they'll adjust the batter's eye. Yeah, I think they will a little bit. So the old batter's eye had trees out there in that area, that open area. And they had trees and they wanted to grow firs. It's like at Cheney Stadium, but they all died. So then, you don't have anything. And so they put this, and the stuff they have on there is supposed to be this space-age, stuff to block out sun and make it so it doesn't reflect, but it doesn't seem like that because the players all say it reflects. So, I don't know. Can't really move the fences in, I don't think. I guess they could, but, your pitching staff benefits from it. And there's just not a lot of good hitters on the market. It's I think we all know they're not going to be in the market for Juan Soto. And then you look at the free agent class; it's not great.
Santander?
Yeah, Santander. And I guess where he's hitting at now, it's not exactly super friendly. So, they've tried it. They've called on Tony Taters several times. Baltimore wanted to keep him. Yeah. I think I know where you're going. Are they going to have to trade one of these pitchers to get a hitter? Yes. There's no other probably. There is no other way to get an elite hitter to sign here. Either you grossly overpay, which I think we know they aren't going to do because they don't have any money supposedly, or you trade one of those 5 and then sign a pitcher and build your rotation that way. Mm-hmm. And so, you have to ask some hard questions. Is Logan Gilbert going to re-sign with this team? Is he going to sign an extension? Because he's making 4 this year. That means he's going to make roughly 8 to 9 next year. And then 14 if he stays healthy. He gets real expensive. George will make 4 or 5 next year. Cal's going to make 5 next year at least, probably 6. So, do they trade one of those? Or do you just trade Castillo, who's got a locked-in contract? You don't have the ups and downs of arbitration. But at the same time, these guys are going to throw more innings than any other rotation in baseball when it's all said and done, if they stay healthy. Make every start basically other than Wu. Do you think that happens next year? I don't know.
I can't believe it's happened in 2 of 3 years because it happened in 22 and now it's happened in 24 outside of Wu.
Yeah, so it's where do they go?
Yeah.
We said today, we were watching the Orioles game. Do you trade Logan for Colton Cowser and another guy?
So this actually wasn't where I was going, but now that you bring it up, we've talked about this. And honestly, we talked about the idea of Castillo more than the others just because older, he's not really making that much when you compare what his contract is to a lot of the pitchers that'll be on the market. And we talked about Baltimore. Could you get somebody back, one of those young hitters, for him? And then you essentially, to your point, you sign a veteran to a 1-year deal, and you hope by mid-season of next year one of Logan Evans, Brandon Garcia, et cetera, is ready, and then they take that 5 spot.
Yeah, no, that's because that's the one thing you do is you believe that your developmental aspect of your organization, which has been so strong on the pitching side, that you can offset that. Yeah, it's going to hurt, and it's in the common sense optics area, it's not going to look great, but I think people don't realize how difficult it is to get hitters here. You know, I mean, and we don't really even know what direction they're going to go this offseason. What if they say, well, we can't add any more money, so you got to do payroll flexibility and create some stuff. I mean, if that's the case, they'll trade Randy this offseason and try and piece it together because he's going to make a lot of money next year. He's going to make 12. So, I mean, do they exercise the option on Polanco at 12? Mitch is going to make 16 next year. So it's like, if they don't add more money, if they say to Jerry, look, we're not adding you money, where are you going to get a hitter at then if you can't add money? Even if you could take out a contract. Because like the club-controlled hitters, nobody really wants to trade those if they don't have to. You know, is Tyler Locklear going to fix it? Probably not. So they're in a weird spot because like their position player prospects, even as good as they are, they're still a couple of years away, especially the ones with the sort of offensive impact. I think we all like Cole Young and what he can be, but even then, like, do you view him as an impact, 20 homer, 790 OPS guy? Probably not right now. Eventually he will be, but like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. The three we always talk about before I let TJ go in terms of like the real offensive impact, at least the three the two of us talk about, Emerson, Montez, Celestine, like they're a ways away.
Yeah.
So
I mean, look at how much Montez struggled when he got to Modesto or to Everett for a bit. It's starting to self-correct, but Double A is going to be that much harder, and everything else. But they don't have the best track record of developing hitters, anyways. And how they bring them up. So. I mean, Julio's the exception, but it took Cal a while. Jared, obviously. And I just don't know where they get offense from, because like if you just run it back with, I guess like if you ran it back with this team next year, where do you think they're at?
Well, I guess
offensively.
Yeah.
Well, just in general, I mean, like because you expect some regression from the starting pitching because it just can't carry.
Yeah. I guess I'd also 85? Like to believe. Yeah, I guess I'd
wins
also
probably.
What'd you say, TJ?
85 wins. I would guess.
I mean, that's what they were this year, projection-wise, right?
Yeah. Well, I would say a little bit of progression on the hitting side because it can't possibly be worse.
Yeah.
And then a little bit of regression in the starting rotation probably balances out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you think that obviously Julio will probably be better next year. JP will probably be better if he stays healthy, because they had career down years.
Right.
Cal. Who knows? I mean, he's really good this year. Then you have Garver, Haniger, Randy. I don't know. And then you still have a problem at third base and first base, your power positions. And if you don't allow the money, so then you're looking at Locklear in some form of a platoon again at third base. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's true.
Last thing for me, Ryan, before we let you go. Do you think this current team still has a run left in them?
Oh, yeah. I do, because they're at a streak of 14 games where they've scored more than 4 runs once, I think, or twice maybe. And most of them in 2 runs or fewer. So I do think you're going to run into a stretch where you face some weaker pitching and you'll hit. They do face the Angels and the A's, and St. Louis isn't great this year, so that's a stretch where they can make some hay. I just don't think that they. I guess my thinking is they can't be as bad as they've been. That's why I think there's going to be a run, because their pitching is so good and they get so many quality starts that you're going to. But how many, I don't even look now, but how many quality starts have they gotten post All-Star break? And I think they've won less than 50% of them.
Yeah,
it's pretty hard.
I think it might be lower than 50%.
Yeah, it's pretty hard.
It's not good regardless.
Ryan, isn't offense supposed to get better as the season goes on? What the hell?
You would think. Well, this is probably supposed to be the best offensive month. You're in a groove, and it's still warm out.
Yeah.
So
I don't know.
Yeah, you would think. But the Mariners, historically, as a franchise, have gone against almost every single logic. So
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's the one thing too, is like we have really not seen a stretch of even 2 weeks of semi-consistent offense. So maybe it comes, but you know, again, like seeing Julio's at bats over the weekend, that didn't inspire you, you know.
No.
And so, and Randy's got 3 hits in the last 12 games.
Yeah, since I think it's since the road trip started, and I think
Yeah.
one of them for an extra base hit. Yeah, he's on a big cold.
I mean, he's hit the ball hard a couple of times, and people have caught it, but yeah, they're just, it's a tough watch sometimes when you're watching them.
Yeah. Ryan, this has been fantastic. We appreciate you, as always, making some time for us, and at least for my sake, I know Lyle will see you sooner than I will. Hope to see you at the park soon.
Yeah, I'll see Lyle tomorrow. Hopefully it's pants weather.
Thanks again, Ryan.
See you guys.
Well, we'll say it again. Divish certainly is the best. And on that note, where do we want to start with these takeaways?
Man. I'm just going to start off and say Ryan Divish has my vote for the vice president of common sense for the Mariners. I think the position fits him perfectly. He can be snarky and sarcastic and give anyone shit that he wants to in that position because ultimately, well, he's the all-knower in that case. So he has my vote. If that's eventually what he decides to do, I'm all in on Ryan Divish having that position. But on a more serious note, I want to go to the first ringing thing that stood out to me from this conversation, where it sounds like a significantly more realistic path to the Mariners acquiring a big bat this offseason would be trading not only one of their pitchers, but one of their best pitchers out of this current starting rotation. So Ryan highlights if the Root Sports situation gets worse, or let's just say it stays the same, and the payroll can't increase, the only logical way the Mariners get a serious bat in here this offseason. People want everyday players. Well, this is the way you would get an everyday player. If you wanted to go get one of those guys this offseason, the trade pieces on your roster that you would have to use to get that bat would be one of your starting pitchers. And I'm not talking Bryce Miller or Brian Wu, Lyle. I'm talking the guys that are making money, like Logan Gilbert or George Kirby, who are both Super 2 pitchers, who by the time they reach their 4th year of arbitration will be making well over $20 million, which we know Mariners probably can't afford, given their current budget restraints. That is troubling.
Well, we also talked about Luis Castillo, too. And I'm sorry, but if you have to pick one pitcher in this rotation to trade, I don't even really think it's up for debate anymore. It's him. He is the oldest. He's making the most money. He does not look like an ace. And there are teams out there that would want him.
But he's the only one who could block a trade. So if he flat out blocks a trade, you have no choice.
Okay, but even with a no trade clause, usually these things find a way of working themselves out. Usually.
It just depends what Luis wants.
I am sure there is a team and a fit that he would agree to. Again, would he really hate Baltimore, a team that's going to be a World Series contender that's also a pitcher's park now? I don't think so.
I don't think so. It depends what the market is. If the market is willing to pay what we suggested earlier, like a month ago when we talked about this idea of if they could get a Kjerstad level player, a Kjerstad and a Kobe Mayo type package for Luis Castillo, then yes, you do that. So he says yes to the trade, and you acquire that prospect package for Luis Castillo, and you offload his salary. Now, there is a slight issue with that, though, Lyle. If you were to offload the full $24 million of Luis Castillo, I don't think you'd get both those players. If that's what the market was, if you're giving the Orioles $24 million in payroll, you probably get one of those players. And now think about this. So you do that trade. That's not enough, and you just lost a fifth of your starting rotation.
I would bet the Mariners will eat some of that money. Again, $24 million is not a lot. If the Mariners eat $10 million of it, $12 million of it, you could get a lot more back. And if you get club controllable players that we know can be real impact guys moving forward in the big leagues, look, no prospect's ever a sure thing, but Kobe Mayo's got Austin Riley comps. Heston Kjerstad has been very good when he's been in the big leagues. I would do that, especially if you really think you're going to have to offload money.
So that's certainly a scenario. We've spent the most time talking about a Luis Castillo trade. That's obviously the most preferable if they're going to trade the starting pitchers, because you can offload the most salary, and he's the most tradable of all of them based on where he is in his career and the production he's given you this season. But what about the other things, Lyle? The two guys that are going to be astronomically expensive, and that we know, the two of them cannot be here long-term together. That will not happen. The Mariners don't have the payroll to do that. What those two guys are going to cost on the open market. The fact that, like, Ryan Divish floated those two names out there, as soon as this offseason, if the Mariners were going to go out and get that A-level bat, not a Kjerstad projectable bat, like an A-level bat that could help this lineup. Like, what comes across your mind when he says that?
This fan base is going to burn down. We're going to be set up for another offseason of just unreal content. I got to tell you what, if things like that start to go down, good Lord.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're serious about that, you think trading one of those guys gets you a real bat, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit, but like, throw somebody out there. Who are you getting back? Are you talking about, like, I don't want to use the Orioles again. Maybe we can think of somebody else, but just because it's off the top of my head. Like,
is it Jackson Holiday? Like, still projectable, but we're talking more upside.
But that's not a proven guy for George Kirby or Logan Gilbert. I was going to say, like, like the only guys that would warrant those guys from Baltimore, for example, would be like Gunnar, but the Orioles aren't going to do that.
No. And like Bobby Witt's not getting traded. No.
I don't think you're getting somebody like that. I think you almost have to take a step down.
Yeah, you would. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about this in regards to what Corbin Burnes was traded for. A little bit farther along in his arbitration, Brewers are in a similar situation as the Mariners were in. They couldn't afford to extend Burnes. I don't think they wanted to pay the final year of his arbitration. That relationship had been fractured, so they traded him to the Orioles with 1 year of control. And the Brewers got Joey Ortiz, who's had a good year this year, 110 WRC+. plus. He's been worth 2.5 wins. He's played good defense. Dale Hall's stunk for the Orioles. Hasn't been very good this year. So that was with 1 year. The Mariners, now I would be surprised if they trade one of these two in the offseason because they're not really expensive yet, but they will be. Just not not next year. Next year, Logan's going to make around $9 million. George is going to make $4 million. That's not an astronomical amount. It only starts getting more after the fact where you have to start thinking about extending them. And when the other money on your players around your roster start making more as well. So at that point, you would have 2 years left of Logan and 3 years left of George Kirby. You could get more than that package that the Orioles gave up to get Corbin Burnes. But you don't want that package that Corbin Burnes got the Brewers, because he only had 1 year control. And I will say this, when the Brewers traded Corbin Burnes, he was a better pitcher than Logan Gilbert or George Kirby is right now. As good as they're pitching, Corbin Burnes was better. He won a Cy Young. So if that's the return Corbin Burnes got for only 1 year, that means that to get the return you would want for big league bats, you would have to trade them with at least 2 years left.
I'm still trying to think about what type of player it would warrant, because I'm trying to think about contending teams, and most of those teams aren't trading their top guys. Like throw the Dodgers out, because aside from their top-heavy future Hall of Famers, there's not anybody on that roster you're trading Logan or Kirby for. We talked about the Orioles. I don't really know who it would be from the Braves. All those guys are on big contracts, or like not big contracts, but they're not going to trade Acuna. And if you're talking about somebody like Riley or Olsen, those guys are on bigger contracts. So like, I'm still trying to think about who gets you the return you want.
I was thinking, like, in terms of fit, Austin Riley would be the fit and what the Braves need. But I know the contract.
I was going to say, he's on a $210 million deal.
Right. Man, see what happens when you don't spend any money?
Wow. It's almost like they should try doing that. Huh. You know, we've talked about them spending and not spending in free agency. I think people's gripes would be a lot less if they were doing something like the Braves did and started extending a lot of their own guys in-house. They're not even doing that. They have done 2 extensions. Julio, as of right now, is not playing up to that contract in any way, shape, or form. Luis Castillo has been good. We also don't know if he's going to be here the full length of that contract. He may get traded. Where are the rest of them? Where's Kirby's? Where's Logan's? Where's Cal's?
Well, how would you... The 2 in-house prospect extensions they've done, Lyle, could you say either have been a success?
Okay, but you know what you have in Kirby and Gilbert now.
They can't... again, it just doesn't seem like they're willing to pay that much.
This is...
If they were going to give out 2 of those extensions to those guys, what Strider's contract is... Was it 90?
His is a joke. It
is a joke, yeah. And there's no way Logan Gilbert or George Kirby would agree to that contract. That's the legitimate only way you could sign both of them.
I also have to dial this back for a second. Are you really trying to compare George Kirby and Logan Gilbert to Evan White?
Well, we're talking in-house extensions, aren't we?
Well, yeah. But
Evan was
again,
a top 60 prospect.
Well, Evan White got that contract before he played a single big league game. Kirby and Gilbert are now bona fide all-stars.
Yeah, and I think the Mariners learned their lesson about handing that out, didn't they? Because they offered Jared the same thing.
Well.
How would have that worked?
Yeah.
Right.
But again, now you know. You have seen it. You have proven it if you're Logan and George.
If you're George Kirby, why would you sign that?
Yeah, I don't know. I think of the 2, you have a better chance to sign Logan. But again, like
even if you're Logan, why would you sign that contract? You know what you're worth on the open market. You see what these guys get?
Well, they need to commit to signing one of them.
I'm sure they do. But again, like unless you think it's worth your time, Logan Gilbert and George Kirby know they're worth well over $30 million a year on the open market.
Yeah. You know what?
Okay. Do you have anything else to say on this? Because we do have some more to get to here.
Yeah, we do. So let me transition us here. Again, like none of these topics are going to be fun at all. Second one, not only could a pitcher get traded, Randy Arozarena might get traded half a fucking year after they traded for him.
Now this move, like you at least kind of get trading a pitcher because you have a lot of them and they would get you by far the biggest return. I have no idea what trading Randy Arozarena would do for you next year besides make you worse. Literally nothing. The only thing Randy would do next year is be a middle-of-the-order bat for you. That's it. And he would be at a reasonable price, anywhere from $12 to $15 million next year. And then he'd become a little bit more expensive after that. It might go over $20 million. But I'm not sure, especially based on the package that the Mariners gave up for Randy Arozarena, what they gave to the Rays. If you got that same package back, are fans happy in the offseason? No, not at all. We're talking about 2 guys as fun of prospects as Brody Hopkins and Aiden Smith are playing in Modesto, low A.
Also, not to mention, again, it's not going to be a good look if you trade somebody from that rotation to get a bat because you should just be able to sign a bat or trade prospects for a bat anyway. But like you said, at least there is some reason and logic behind it. If you know the weakness of your team is your offense and you go trade Randy Arozarena, I said the fan base would burn down if they trade a pitcher. They go do this in the offseason. I mean, we're talking pitchforks. It's going to be bad. If that trade happens half a year after you got him, when you know you need offense, it's going to be really, really bad. I am not looking forward to recording those podcasts if that happens.
And the only reason they would trade Randy is to save money.
Correct.
And that's it. Because he's going to be expensive, and he's going to want his money when he reaches free agency in 2 years. And he's going to look for a pretty penny. That the Mariners are not going to pay him.
No.
That's not going to happen, but that's fine. But why can't the Mariners fork up the combined... Let's do some math here. So they owe him 2 this year. Let's say they pay him 15 next year. That's 17, and they give him 20 in the year after that in 2026. That's $37 million combined. You're telling me you don't have $37 million combined to pay Randy Arozarena the next 2 years?
Think about that. if you were to be told, oh, you get to sign Randy Arozarena to a 3-year, $37 million contract, what would you say?
Yes.
Actually, it's even less than 3. It's 2.5 years for $37.5 million. So, actually, that walks it back. But anyway, point being, that is not a lot to pay a guy that can be as impactful as Randy can. And if you can't fork that up, that's going to be a disgrace. That is going to be a literal disgrace. They better not do that. Let me put that on record right now.
There's no way you could sell a contending offseason and do that.
No.
You would look worse than the Rays would.
Yeah, you thought this past offseason was bad when Mariners fans were livid about trading Jared Kelenic, who everybody knows I love, but he's a career not even 100 WRC plus hitter. You thought the fan base was mad then. You go trade Randy Arozarena half a year after trading for him when you say you're in a contention window and you trade away a piece of your team that is the weakest link by far in your offense. It's going to be so bad. It's going to be so bad if they trade him.
At least the Rays got a good prospect package for him. I don't know if the Mariners could do the same, not after having to flip him again.
Yeah. Like, Randy probably is going to want his money when he hits free agency, and that's fine. He doesn't have to be here come 2.5 years from now. But I at least assumed when they were trading for him that they were going to ride it out for 2.5 years. So do that. Do that. Ride it out, and you can let him hit free agency. You're in this contention window for the next 3 years, at least with this rotation, with the Arozarena. You hope Julio bounces back somewhat. You have Cal. You're in the contention window now. You trade him away. I can't stress it enough. It's going to be bad.
I have some more a more positive takeaway from what Divish said. They're fixing the batter's eye.
Wow. We
need some celebratory music.
I think Divish said they're going to look into it, right? Like, he didn't confirm it, but he
did. You're right. I misspoke. He did not absolutely 100% for sure say they were going to fix the batter's eye, but it's on their mind, which is good. That's all we can ask for.
I can't believe that this has come to light the way it has. Like, did Teoscar Hernandez just save the Mariners offense in a way of not being here?
Well, they do still need to hit after they fix the batter's eye, so that's a to be determined.
Well, yeah.
And as you and I have highlighted in the last few weeks, Lyle, they still managed to hit with a crummy batter's eye. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and Divish talked about some interesting things with it. Well, one, straightening it out would make a lot of sense. I guess I forgot that, there did used to be trees and stuff out there. But then they were dying, so they had to get rid of them. Maybe the extra added elements out there actually helped once upon a time, but that batter's eye being out in center field all on its own actually made it a little harder to pick up the baseball off of. So, yeah, hopefully they'll straighten it out, but I actually thought it was interesting. Divish said they might change the color of it a little bit. Then maybe that would help.
Yeah, was it a less shiny black?
I guess so.
Yeah, more of a matte color.
Yeah. So, yeah, that is a positive. So we've had 2 negatives, 1 positive, and the last 2 takeaways we have are more just observations. I don't really know if they're negative or positive. The first one being, so maybe Jerry and Scott weren't as close as everybody assumed. And when Divish painted the picture to us of why that was, it actually made more sense. I guess we never really stopped to think about it, but yeah. He used the example of the 2 of us. If one of us was technically the boss of this podcast, which in case anybody actually thought that for whatever reason, it's not. It's a very, very equal partnership, which is what makes doing this a lot of fun for both of us. But yeah, Divish is right. Like, if one person was in charge of you for that long and had final say over what you were doing and had to boss you around in some ways at certain times, there would probably be some grown resentment there. And it sounds like over the 9-year period here, that's started to happen.
And it was all of the flack Scott had to catch because of Jerry. People would blame Scott for the roster underperforming, while Scott sits there and thinks, well, these guys just aren't that good. And Jerry got me these players, and it's my fault that Jerry got me bad players. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. This just, I'd say, puts in perspective. There's so many things that people like Ryan Divish and Adam Jude and Daniel Kramer and Shannon Dreyer and even 710 they don't talk about this kind of stuff. This stuff never really comes to light. It doesn't get written about. It's not going to sell newspaper subscriptions. It's not going to do any of that. But it doesn't mean these things don't exist and these dynamics don't exist within organizations and within clubhouses. If you work with anyone for long enough, let's say tensions will come up no matter what. You spend enough time with anybody that it's going to happen. And same be said with Scott Servais and Jerry Dipoto. And, especially after this past week, what we can't say we know for sure what the relationship is, but I'll say it didn't help.
No, it's definitely probably in a worse spot than it once was. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So are you saying in time the two of us are just going to hate each other?
Hate's not the wrong word, but Mike and the Mad Dog, the OG sports talk program, they hated each other. That's why they stopped. Yeah. Right?
Well, Mike in the morning too, with Golick and Greeny.
Yeah.
Those guys. I pledge to never let that happen because, actually, I don't even know if I've said this out loud before, but I always said, I think the two of ours, our friendship between the two of us was always more important to me than all of this. Now, I want this to go as far as it can possibly go, but I would never want it to be at the cost of us, having what happened to us happen to any of them where you're just not friends anymore. So, yeah, I mean, okay, the two of us will sometimes have different opinions about things that are...
You're sad. You're going to make me cry.
I'm going to make you cry? Yeah, that's just my forte, isn't it? I'm such an emotional person.
Well,
anyway.
So opened up your heart to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, the two of us will, have disagreements on, very small things about, how we want to format certain things about for show or for social media or when we're planning certain things, whether we're going somewhere, whether it's for a trip with this podcast or whatever. It's never anything serious though. Sure, if there's not disagreements in a partnership, then it's not a good partnership because you want two people that look at things a little bit differently. That being said, I don't think with Jerry and Scott it was just disagreements where everybody saw things a little bit differently and you had to try to work things out. No, it sounds like that relationship started to get strained over time, and to your point of what you were just alluding to, that Scott started to say, why am I the scapegoat for all of this? All I have been doing is managing the team that you gave me, and I'm getting blamed.
Mm-hmm.
How is that fair? So, yeah, if I were Scott, I would have resentment for my boss, too. It's you are throwing me to the wolves here. I didn't go out and acquire all the players that you've acquired. I just have to play them. And you tell me, who you want played in certain situations. Obviously, we have meetings about all this stuff. And you tell me you like certain ideas X, Y, and Z, and I have to go out and deploy them. So, yeah, it's tough in that way.
Yeah. People blame Scott Servais for Colton Wong, AJ Pollock, and Tommy LaStella all being on the same roster together.
Yeah.
And Scott's probably sitting there being like, well, I don't want these guys on my roster. No. And then the last thing on Scott Servais, speaking of blame pie and taking flack, Scott was harder on Julio than he was on anyone else. It was interesting. So you asked Ryan about Julio's comments on Scott Servais, which were very different from J.P. Crawford's comments when asked earlier in the day about Scott Servais leading, and Julio essentially threw out, well, we're all employees. This stuff happens. And Ryan highlights some of the background of the relationship of Scott Servais and Julio Rodriguez that Ryan was giving us the impression that Scott was harder on Julio than he was on any other player there, which to be honest, Lyle, makes sense. Julio's the star. Scott should. I feel like as a manager, if your best player who is better than everyone else on your team is not performing up to par, you call him on it and you try and find a way to get said player back performing at the top level. In this season, that wasn't the case. If there was anything Scott Servais had to do with the failures of Julio Rodriguez, then that certainly doesn't paint a good line on Scott Servais. But it just sounds like the two, whether it be disagreements or, just having to have more discussions with Julio because of his performance and trying to get him back up to that standard that he was in 2022, it might have not rubbed Julio the right way, it seems like.
We don't know that part for sure, but yeah, it is a possibility. That's what we took away from that conversation. what Divish told us is Scott Servais was harder on Julio than he was on any other player, which, yeah, makes total sense. You are expected to do the most of anybody on the team. You're the best player. You are the most talented player. You have the contract that says you are the best player. The most is expected of you. With great power comes great responsibility. Right. And Servais demanded that out of Julio. He knew that when Julio goes, the rest of the offense can go. And when he's not always going, it can look a little bit like it's looked a lot of this year. So, of course he wanted more out of Julio. And it sounded like he tried to get more out of Julio. Yeah, maybe Julio didn't like the way it was delivered or the way the messages were being, relayed to him. Again, that part we'll never know. Yeah. But, yeah, like...
And I don't know if it's unfair. I don't think so. I feel like if it was unfair, Ryan would have told us, because that's how Ryan operates. Mm-hmm. Like he tells it as it is. He didn't paint it as Scott is being unfairly harsh to Julio.
Right.
It is just in perspective to everyone else on the roster and the role Julio hopes to fill in the future. So I thought that was very interesting. This, again, just a lot of the stuff that won't get written about. I mean, Julio would probably never talk about this. It's just not deep enough for him, not important enough. It's just more of what managers have to deal with on a day-to-day basis and some of the little things about how players receive them and how they don't, right? I think we thought Scott Servais was... I think we had the impression Scott Servais was universally loved by the clubhouse. Now, after we heard that from Jeff Passan earlier this week, or last week on Brock and Salk, and the comment he had about Scott definitely not being that way, and then something that what Divish said in response when you asked him that question, it's a learning experience for us too, when the people who know more than we do sort of fill in the blanks on some of the inner workings of how these organizations operate.
Yeah, it's true. There's a lot to take away in this conversation. I got to tell you. It's hopefully everybody digests it all okay. I'm sure we're going to see more of this play out as the months go on. Certainly in the offseason, we're going to be on our toes. But yeah, overall, like, we wanted to have Divish on for this exact reason, because we knew he'd probably be able to provide a lot of insight and value that the two of us just couldn't do, because like we don't do as much hard-nosed reporting as he does, obviously. And he was able to provide that with us, talking to him about it, and we learned a lot. Oh, we learned a lot that hadn't been out there before today, I think.
Yeah. And he's happy short season is coming to an end.
Yeah. Sorry, Divish. Maybe next year in spring training you'll actually learn the right way and stop wearing the shorts of a 7-footer that go like way below your knees.
I don't think so.
No, he won't. No. Knowing him, he definitely despises the way people our age now dress because, well, he's
a grouch.
Yeah, he's a grouch. He thinks it's dumb. Well, sad.
Sorry, Ryan. Missing out.
Yeah. Yes, he is. All right. I think that wraps up this edition of the Marine Layer podcast. You guys know the drill. If you want to listen to the full form podcast, you can do so wherever you get your audio pods. Make sure to download, leave a 5-star review, leave a written review. If you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, and then check us out on social media. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube Shorts at Marine Layer Pod. That's TJ. I'm Lyle. As always, we thank you guys for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.